For a long time, my partner and I used to live in shared accommodation. We've only just moved out and are incredibly relieved to be free of that nightmare. Our experience began a few months after we'd moved in. I woke up in the middle of the night to a look of fear in my partner's eyes, a look I'd never seen before. Apparently, I'd been talking in my sleep, which isn't incredibly uncommon, but hadn't happened in a very long time. I'd been talking to a man that was in our room, apparently. I dismissed this as a dream that I just didn't recall. My partner thought otherwise, however, and honestly, I wish I believed them straight away. He would appear to me every night in my dreams, tall and malnourished. So tall that he had to bend his neck to the side and stoop just to fit in the room. Every single one of his bones were incredibly defined and visible, and his arms were unnaturally long. Too long. He had elongated fingers and gnarled feet, wispy strands of hair and dark skin, as if he'd been sitting in the sun for centuries. His hands and feet were much darker shades than the rest of his body, though, as if he'd been digging through dirt. The scariest feature he had, however, were his sickeningly bright yellow pupils. Unnaturally bright. The darkness would be so thick that you could barely discern any of his features, all except those piercing eyes, however. One night, I had gone downstairs to grab some ice cream. Came back up to see my partner cowering in the corner at the opposite end of the room. I hurried to their side and was told that they could hear someone running around downstairs and crashing into things. They thought somebody had broken in and assaulted me, then proceeded to run up the stairs and stand directly outside our room. I just note that while I was downstairs, I had heard absolutely none of this commotion and had no knowledge of the situation my partner thought they could hear. I believe them though. I've never seen them so afraid, and they're a terrible liar, so I can always tell when they are. Another night, there was a really intense storm. Thunder, lightning, lashing rain, the lot. We were standing under cover having a cigarette before bed, when a particularly bright fork of lightning went off above us, and for that split second, the sky was illuminated. He was there in front of us. About 20 got away, now stood up straight and still holding us in his gaze, with those almost hypnotically bright pupils. Both of us saw him. Both of us were frozen in place and helpless. I remember my partner grabbing my arm. I'll never forget his face. Expressionless, yet full of malice. His presence was overwhelming, and we could do nothing but stand and stare as another lightning strike went off, and revealed him to be much closer. Again, he was only visible for that split second, but that's all we needed to know, that we were no longer safe. Too stubborn to leave, we just ran to our room and tried to sleep. I dream of him every night. I know he plagues the thoughts of my partner too. A couple of days ago, while showing her around our new house, my niece looked at me and asked, "Is that room for the tall man? I don't like him very much. He says horrible things about you and my partner." Before proceeding to answer any of the questions about him, I presented to her, "I know he's here now. I just pray he doesn't hurt my partner or niece." This will be in chronological order, 2 years back to now, and will also state whose experience it is. Roommate B. Since moving in, she has felt a sense of uneasiness and fear whenever in the dark. She worked late shifts and was always coming back at 2 or 3 a.m. every night. And whenever we would all go to bed and leave all the lights off, she said she never felt safe. So we would always leave the living room or kitchen light on for her. The feeling she blamed on the demon that she believes followed her from the doors. Me? I've started to see from my peripheral this black figure peer out from behind a wall while I'm in the kitchen. There have been many times I would think that it was my hair on my glasses. However, this keeps popping up whenever my hair is up. And also, I never see it anywhere else, only when I'm in the kitchen. There was a time when I was in the kitchen alone. The figure had come out from behind the wall and walked up behind me. I heard the footsteps and everything. Of course, when I turned around, nothing was there. I don't feel bad vibes from it. I still see now every time I'm in the kitchen. roommate A and B, and me. We start to hear footsteps outside our doors. My roommates have heard it only a couple of times, but eventually chalked it up to being our upstairs neighbours, and the creaks just sounded like it was on our floor. I believed them at first, but then it started to happen when nobody was in the apartment, on break. And on a few occasions, I've heard the same creaks in my room. These I also do not fear, they just kind of annoy me. Roommate B. She started to feel unsafe in her room. There's a dark spot by her doorway that she says feels like something watching her. It's not good energy. At this time, she started to leave her LED lights on so that her room was never in the dark. There was an instance when A turned off her lights to save energy. We were not paying for utilities at this time, and this sets B off. Roommate B. A went home for break, and B says that the apartment feels safe now, and now believes that whatever is attached to her, B, was brought from A. C and I believe that it's something that came up from the negative tension between A and B. Now this has cleared up a lot for B, and she started to see and feel less things with A not being there. I, however, still am seeing and feeling whatever the shadow figure is. We've now concluded there are multiple things in our apartment. Roommate B. A comes back, and B starts to feel unsafe again. Me. Nearing finals, I was stressing over essays I had to get done, and had locked myself in my room and had headphones on to block out my roommates who were watching TV in the living room. My room shares a wall with the living room. I started to hear knocking on my door, so I'd ask what to see what they wanted, but there was no reply. For the next hour, there'd be constant knocking on my door, and progressively getting more frustrated, I'd raise my voice again asking, what? I took off my headphones and walked over to the door to see if I could catch my roommates running away, thinking they were messing with me, but nothing. I went back to my desk and had left only one side of the headphone over my ear. I started typing again, and 10 or 15 minutes in, there was banging on my door. The solid 3 bangs were all that was needed to set me off. I got up and went to the living room, and rage-filled was yelling at my roommates. Who's doing that? I'm fucking working on my project, and I've had enough. B and C stared at me, dumbfounded. They'd been sitting on the couch, watching a movie this whole time. A came out of her room and walked to the bathroom. I asked if it was her, and she denied. I didn't focus on her too much, because she is more kept to herself, whereas B and C are always playing tricks. To cool myself off, I went to the bathroom to wash my face, and from the peripheral of my eye, I saw a little girl in a white gown standing in the hallway, looking into the bathroom. The girl looked like B, so I went out of the bathroom and went back to the living room, and told her to go at it, but she said she was sitting there the whole time, and C said so too. We have 2 sinks in the bathroom, and A was using the other one, so it wasn't her either. I've never had this experience since then, and have never seen the little girl after either. I don't know if it was from the stress from my finals that got to me, but this was by far my most compelling experience in something. Roommate B. She started practicing with her tarot cards. Like I said earlier, she has no prior experience with this, and was trying for the first time with me. Her reading for me was pretty accurate, and all things that I believe really resonated with me. I encouraged her to keep trying it out, and that's what she did. Now, it was her and C. C did not want to partake in it, but was watching B do a reading for herself. During this time, B was having trouble figuring out her relationship with somebody, and had decided to use the reading to help her get direction. C and I have been talking to her about her relationship with this person, and have given her a lot of advice too, but she never took our word. From what C said, the cards were telling her the exact same things we would tell her, and yet again, B refused to take its words. She started to say a lot of disrespectful things to the cards, and kept saying that it doesn't know what it's talking about. Roommate C. C, not really believing in these things, had come up to me, and said that lately she'd been feeling a little uneasy in the apartment. She believes that it started since B had done the tarot readings. C and I have no background in tarot reading, and do not know or understand everything behind it. But we believe that whatever C started feeling is because B was being disrespectful towards her spirit guides. B has also not been good mentally and has been to therapy, but has given up on that and is only turning to things involved with witchcraft, crystals, and astrology. There's nothing wrong with turning to these, but C and I think that it's not safe for her to be contacting spirits, while her head is currently in a very negative state. Roommate A moves out the apartment. This is for personal reasons. She doesn't believe in the paranormal. Roommate B does not feel or see anything anymore, but watches a lot of scary movies, and so scares herself. Still mentions her fear of the dark, but it goes away after a couple days. Roommate C feels uneasy now because of what she believes B brought into the apartment. Wants her pastor to cleanse the entire apartment, but B will not let her, for the same reason C does not want B to cleanse the apartment with sage. Me? I still see the dark figure when I'm in the kitchen. I also hear footsteps occasionally, but have ultimately decided that it's the neighbours. Now, we're moving out of this apartment in a week, and moving into a new place, the three of us. I'll come back to this if anything follows us to the new house. This started happening about a year ago. I'm posting this just to see if anyone knows why this is happening, or how to stop it. The first encounter was last spring, when me and my friend decided to go hiking on this trail that's about a 10-minute walk from my house. We were about half a mile into the trail when we heard it. It was a woman screaming for her life. She yelled and pleaded with us to come help, but when we yelled back to ask if we should call someone, she didn't answer and kept repeating asking us to come help her. I'd like to say that we immediately left the woods and called the police, but we didn't. Something in our 15-year-old minds convinced us that it would be safe for us to go check it out ourselves. We armed ourselves with rocks and headed down the trail when we heard another voice telling the women to shut up or they'd kill her. Then both voices went silent. This is when we finally called the non-emergency police line, who referred us to 911, who told us to exit the trail and wait for an officer. And about 10 minutes later, one showed up. Like the police in most of these stories, they were no help and were very suspicious of two teenage girls calling in a possible homicide. They supposedly searched the whole 10-mile trail in about 20 minutes and came back and told us they found nothing, but took our names down and told us they would get back to us if anything came up. But I guess nothing did, because I never heard from them again. When I got home, I told my sister, and this is when she told me she thought it might have been a skinwalker, a native legend that our father had told us about. The skinwalker will try to lure you by disguising itself as someone you know or who needs help. I told her that was crazy, but it still lingered in the back of my mind. The next encounter took place a few nights later. I was walking the dogs with my sister when she looked over and sort of chuckled as she said, "Why is that trash can in the middle of the road?" I looked past the gate of our community and I saw it. It was a wide creature with skinny legs and arms with hands that looked like claws. I told her that I didn't think it was a trash can, but I didn't know what it was. It then started moving towards us in a strange way that didn't look human, but it didn't exactly look like the way an animal moved either. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my entire life. As soon as we got home, we told my mom, and she looked at us like she thought we were crazy. But when we told my dad, he looked worried, and he told us about his experience when he was camping, and saw something eerily similar to what we saw. We didn't walk the dogs at night for a good amount of time, until we felt like things were normal again. Nothing happened for a while, and everything felt safe again. This happened in January. I had made new friends, and we were hanging out one night when one of them decided to show the rest of us a hideout they had made in the woods. A little stupid to go out in the woods at night, I know, but it was a fine neighbourhood, and it felt safe enough at the time. We were walking through the woods when suddenly we heard someone screaming for help. It was a man this time. I had learned my lesson from last time and I snapped at my friends to run and go back to the car. When we were back in the car, I told them about the skinwalkers and my previous experiences, and they looked at me like I was crazy until I pulled up a video of a supposed skinwalker sighting that sounded exactly like what we had just heard. I didn't go to the woods at night for a while after that, but eventually I forgot it even happened and returned to the woods. The next encounter happened about a month ago. I thought it was over after those encounters, but apparently not. I was walking to the woods with one of my friends that was with me for the previous encounter when I dropped my phone. He pulled out his flashlight and helped me look for it because it was pitch black. That's when I heard it. This time, a little boy screaming for help. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying, but I had heard enough. I told my friend we should get out of there, and we did. The next encounter happened a few weeks ago. Me and my sister were walking her dog when we heard someone screaming incoherently. We yelled back to ask if they needed help, but the voice just kept screaming. I told my sister we needed to go back, and we did. The most recent encounter happened 2 nights ago. Me and my friends were walking around a ditch by their house. We didn't think it would be dangerous because we'd gone there at night before. We were about half a mile away from the car when we saw it. My friend thought it was just a sign, but then it moved. It was a creature with horns or arms that it raised above its head. We could only see the outline of it because it was pitch black except for a streetlight, but it was clearly there and started moving towards us. We booked it to the car and went back to my house. I haven't been outside past dark since. I haven't told anyone about this last encounter over fear of scrutiny for going back to outside after what happened, but I feel like I have to tell someone. I know this isn't as scary as some of the other stories here, but I'm genuinely fearing for my life. I don't know what this creature wants or how to get rid of it, but it feels good to get this off my chest. I legitimately grew up in a haunted house. It's not like in the movies. There's sometimes months between events and then something happens, and it just surrounds you with an oppressive feeling. Always feeling watched, uncomfortable, and unwelcome there in an otherwise wonderful childhood and family. Growing up, I was scared of that place, but I didn't know why. I loved being there, but it was creepy. I'd hear footsteps in the attic, which wasn't even walkable. It was unfinished. I'd see dark shapes moving at night, but the worst thing to happen was one night I couldn't fall asleep. It was like 11 p.m., which was late for me. I was watching cartoons and out of nowhere, a stack of loose leaves flung off a shelf and went halfway across the room, papers flying everywhere. I turned on the lights so fast, it had to be a record. Coming from a huge family, it was almost unheard of to be home alone. But one Thanksgiving after a shift at CVS, I went home to change before meeting up with my family at an aunt's house. I'm upstairs in my room when I hear, clear as day, footsteps of someone walking around, opening and closing cabinets, and the trash can. I went down thinking someone was waiting for me to give them a ride. When I realised that I was actually alone, I was hit with a feeling of dread and felt surrounded, so I noped out of there. My little sister, at about 6 years old, with tears in her eyes, mentioned the shadows that move around and are darker than the darkest parts of the room. My dad, who's the biggest skeptic and yells at us all for scaring ourselves whenever we talk about our experiences, came downstairs one night, pale as humanly possible. For reference, he's Italian and so tan that as a kid, I thought he was a black man. And told us that while watching the Yankees game in his room, he felt like someone was there, so he rolled over and there was a shadowy figure just leaning over the bed staring at him. He believed us after that. I had a dream that my dad was going to ask me to put away the Christmas decorations in the basement. I brought down the nativity and remembered thinking, I probably shouldn't let baby Jesus be face down, for some reason. So I made sure I placed him face up. When I went down with the next few things, I noticed he was face down and was like, fuck, that's not good. And then I looked up and saw a 7 foot tall shadow figure with a weird wolf like head on a humanoid body. Without facing me or moving, it kind of just spoke into my head. I found you, over and over until I woke up. There's many more stories to tell, but basically, those are most of the biggest. In general, it's just a day-to-day feeling of being watched or creeped out. I had trouble sleeping there because I always felt like something was there when I closed my eyes. But thank God that I've moved. I've not experienced even a tenth of that stuff. But I still randomly will get a little feeling or hear a faint whisper. It's funny, I live literally with a cemetery as my backyard and experience practically nothing compared to that house. Little bit of background. At the time, I was living in a pretty big house in a small village that was scarcely populated. Our house had 3 floors and a basement, and also belonged to different people throughout its history. I lived there with my parents, 2 siblings, and my grandfather. The top floor was for him. And very often got visitors, also for the night. As you can imagine, I was rarely home alone. At the time of the story, I was between 8 and 11 years old. I'm not given exact times in the descriptions. I am at this point 22, and as a kid, I was never keeping track of the years. I remember a lot of stuff, but it's not its exact placement in time, but they are placed chronologically. As a member of a fighting family, as I called it at the time, military members, police officers, etc., I was always trained to face problems in life intelligently and with a clear mind. So even as a child, I tried to find explanations for many things and tried not to fear them. Whether it was a forest at night or some weird places my family showed me, places they found criminals at, I was never fearful of ghosts or some made-up creatures as most kids are. Just unease at most. But our house was different. I moved in there when I was 7. I never felt wanted there. At least in the beginning, it was just that. I dismissed any classic paranormal activities due to the amount of people that were in our home. Doors shutting loudly, banging at doors or windows. We also had a few trees close to one of the sides. So even on upper floors, it was explainable to some degree. Items that shouldn't be where I found them. It was always either wind, or my older siblings doing stupid jokes, or anything you can come up with. I'm also sure, or rather hope, that most of it was truly just that. So it was all okay, and for the most part, I just felt weird and unwanted in our house. But there, I always had those damned nightmares. I never connected them with that home, to be honest. But as I was reflecting upon my life lately, I realised that this stopped very quickly after we moved out from there, and that I never dreamed of them when we stayed at someone else's place. I'm sure you had at least one dream where you felt everything. The food you've eaten, the grass under your toes, the water, the wind, everything either as if it was real, or even much stronger. I had dreams like that at least once a night, and I was eaten alive in such dreams, or disemboweled, or tortured, killed, repeatedly. Killed, then woken up, fell asleep, and killed again in the next dream, and repeat. Buried alive, shot at, pushed out the window, and felt my body break after hitting the ground. Burned, torn into pieces, and every possible combination of those. I know these pains were real, because later, or during that time, whenever I was even strongly wounded, I didn't care about it. Skin torn to bone on my leg, which will come up later. Skin and flesh cracked deeply from a bat hit and fall from a few meters high. Slingshot to my back. Nothing was enough for me to cry longer than just a sometimes very short moment. If I even cried at all. I just felt like that guy in a movie who says stuff like, I've been through worse. And I was a child. The turning point for me was that one time I went to the basement. At home, it was only me and my grandpa, but he was on his floor, the third. It was a hot summer, and I wanted to grab something from the cellar. That time I went down felt different though. It was a basement, but due to us living on one side of a hill, It was basically just another floor when looking from one side. Oftentimes it got warm, for cellar standards, especially because the sun could perfectly reach this one wall. This time it was warm there, but all the time I had a chilling cold at my back. After entering, I went deeper. It consisted of several rooms, and I had warm air everywhere around me, besides my back. And the deeper I went, the more I had the feeling I should turn around and go back up. After reaching the middle of the whole place, it had one central room with two rooms next to it and two corridors. I dismissed this thought of turning away. Aloud, I said bullshit to raise my spirits, and something fell in the boiler room. I turned around and felt this cold move from before my face to my back. I felt it moving. At that moment, I stopped caring about what could fall down and felt frozen in place. I don't know how long it took, but finally I started moving sideways in the direction of the corridor I came from. I felt as if my back went from cold to frozen at that time, and I didn't dare to turn around again. I started shivering, so cold it went. When something fell again behind me, I wailed silently, I think, and slowed down that movement to tiny sideways steps. And then I heard that voice in my head, go. But it didn't feel like mine, foreign. Definitely not a child's voice, as if I could hear it in my head, but I was not the one who thought it. And believe me, that I started running to that door faster than a racing dog to his master. From that point on, I strongly believed that my parents might be right 99% of the time, but some things are unexplainable with logic. I also started being fearful of that basement. As I said, we were living on the side of one hill, on the most bluff part. So the stairs to our basement were very steep, almost like those in the mountains we can sometimes see on photos from faraway places. For me as a kid, it was almost like a climb up. For this reason, I was always turtle slow when using them, and extra careful to not fall down. Upright position, both arms either pushing to the walls or one arm touching steps behind me for extra stability, step after step. One of the times when I was going to tell my father to come up for supper, I felt a push to my back when I was still very high up. I fell forwards, covering my head with arms. I hit hard concrete with my protected head and started sliding down, with my legs being covered only by shorts. I was sliding down sharp, bare concrete stairs. I think it was the same summer as the cellar occurrence. Aftermath? Quite a few bruises and a hurt leg. While my right leg was mostly unharmed, the other had a pretty deep wound, with the tissue torn down to the bone of my shin for a few centimeters in length. And I didn't even cry. The pain was strong, but I was partially used to it. But I was also absolutely terrified of that push I felt. After that accident, I was much more aware of my surroundings, and I started to notice that not all the bangs and knocks made sense. Any time it could have happened by someone is not mentioned here. Yes, it was a big house. Yes, it was often full with people, but more door bangs than there were doors on said floor, while no one was on it, was definitely not normal. One time, when I was searching for some sports equipment under the stairs, while everyone else was either away or in the garden, I heard like 10 bangs on the floor just above me. On that floor were only 6 doors, and only 2 massive enough to produce a bang like that without being damaged. I went up to check it, and as I suspected, it was empty. With all the doors but the entry door open. As I was there, it was quiet, but I felt similarly as to the time in the basement. This time, I followed that thought of better going away and went down to the others. My father checked the house for intruders when I told him about the bangs, but it was still empty. Later that day, when I looked up at the window of our staircase, I saw a slightly blurry face behind a window. Terrified, at that moment, I literally thought, I'm fucked. Fast forward to a time when I was about 10 years old. Around a year, I would say. In that time, different stuff was happening. Bangs, items being not where they should be, like my own scissor knife, being at the half attic we had in our staircase. Very often, I felt observed. Sometimes I thought I saw something in the corner of my eye. But sometimes I straight up saw someone going into a room. When I checked it, it was always empty. The night before we went to visit my best friend a few kilometers away, I made the worst deal on this planet. I wanted to be super rested so I could do all sorts of fun stuff with him and stay up all the time we'd be at his parents'. We were going away for a few days. I was lying in my bed with my father gone for night shift, my mother feeling a little bit sick and already sleeping, and my grandfather and siblings away for some party. He often took us to cool places for a drink. Also, little clarification, my siblings are 10 and 12 years older than me. So back to me trying to sleep. I'm already drifting away after a relatively calm day, and then I heard a bang in my wardrobe. It was my sister's old room, also one of these that I saw someone going in or out pretty often. And as years later I learned from her, through a joke, she and her friends sometimes called out ghosts there. I instantly stopped being sleepy and waited for something else to happen. For a while, nothing. And then knock, knock, knock on its door. I stayed in bed and waited. Knock, knock, knock. And silence. Knock, knock, knock. At this point I had enough. I was sure it was my brother. Then he got back through the basement. It had an extra door. Then that he hid in my wardrobe. He liked to make jokes about ghosts to scare me since he learned about my suspicions. And thought he went to the next level. From talking to doing. Encouraged by my age, excitement, and need to show my brother how brave I was, I went from my bed and said aloud, "Fuck" is literally what I said. It was a new English word for me at the time. "Fuck, Camel, you're a dumbass." I turned the main light on and I quickly opened my wardrobe and jumped away karate style, ready to hit him if he jumped out. And saw nothing, only my clothes. Eyebrows up, smile down, I searched the wardrobe. Found nothing, and I expected at least some little electric device that could have jumped and produced a knock or something like that. I closed it, checked that little space behind my wardrobe with all the lights turned on, but saw nothing. My wardrobe knocked by itself. The more I searched my wardrobe, the less secure I felt. But then I got the strongest goosebumps and went back to bed with my night lamp on, covering my head with sheets. And then I hear it again, after a while. Knock, knock, knock. Short silence. Knock, knock, knock. Silence. Knock, knock, knock. And then a whisper saying my name. This time, it was talking not in my head, but I could hear it as if someone was in the room. It called out my name repeatedly, and it was not a familiar voice. "Philip." Pause. "Philip." Pause. "Philip." Longer pause, and then from much closer, louder and shorter, "Philip." That was too much for me, and I whined under my sheets. "Just leave me alone tonight. Then you can follow me to the end of my life." I heard something like air whooshing, but not quite, and felt normal again very quickly. Later that night, when I woke up with my head not covered with sheets anymore, I looked around. Despite rain outside and later hours, my room was more bright than before. I thought it was a pretty nice way that I dealt with the problem. 12 years later, I'm now sitting in a totally different place, never feeling alone since that night. And at this point, I really don't fucking know if I'm more worried that I always feel presence, or if I'd be more worried if this feeling disappeared. This happened to me when I was a kid, in the summer of '97. I'm 32 now, and this has always stuck with me, and I do believe that it was my first paranormal and otherworldly experience. I do still have the occasional spookum here and there, but what I'm about to talk about only happened once, and I have zero idea what it was. Before I start the story, I'd like to point out that for one, it happened in the late 90s, so no personal computers or cell phones, interior security cameras, where there were no pets in the place at the time, and I'm an only child. So no other kids around me when this happened, and this was not sleep paralysis. I've never experienced it, and hope not to too. It was a late summer night. I was spending the weekend at my aunt's house. I was awoken by jingling coming from underneath my bed. Very soft jingling, like tiny bells. Half asleep, still, I just laid there, figuring that I was still dreaming and it would go away in a second. But it didn't. The jingling got louder. I could hear it clearer now and sounded like it was crawling up. I could hear the tiny creature grunting as it scaled up the wall behind me. Being fully awakened by whatever this was, I was too scared to turn over and see what it was for fear of it noticed me, looking at it, that it would hurt me or something. As I was starting to panic about it, before I knew it, the creature was on a different wall. In front of the closet this time, I could hear the sliding doors on the closet shake as it moved up. Finally getting the courage to take a peek because I knew its back was turned away from me. I see this bright blue and white flash right at the spot where the wall and ceiling met. And poof, it was gone. A sense of calmness washed over the room. I promptly passed out, and when I awoke the next morning, my upright suitcase with wheels was knocked over on its side. And there were very light, very small footprints on the closet door, right near where the flash happened. Does anyone have any ideas on what possible cryptid I may have encountered that night? I'm not very familiar with the smaller species of cryptids, if it is that. Or does anyone think it may have been an alien, or something else entirely? Or if anyone else has ever had something similar happen to them, I'd love to hear it. And I'm more than happy to share some more experiences, if anyone else wants to hear them. A few years ago, while I was in high school, there was this big building, 3 floors high. I think it belonged to the government that me and my friends used to kinda hang around in. Now, a little bit of backstory to that building. As far as I know, this building belongs to the government and is used for a lot of things. Mainly offices of government attorneys and the likes. Not too sure though. Anyways, me and the boys like to hang around there on Fridays, since the building was practically empty for some reason on that day. From time to time, I'd go there alone, just to kind of chill around and listen to music. Now this building, when it's empty, has some bloody eerie vibes, I tell you. Granted, no mystical hissing or any horrifying monster living in the walls, as far as I'm concerned. But nevertheless, I guess you could call it quite liminal. One night, I decided to go down to the parking lot, which was below said building. I told myself, don't be a coward, and things like that, and immediately started going down the stairs. The moment I stepped in the parking lot, though, my body kind of froze. You see, normally when I get the feeling of, ooh, there's something creepy there, I just brush it off and convince myself that the paranormal isn't real and stuff like that. But when I stepped in that parking lot, I thought there was something truly there. Not paranormal, but real. And then I just kind of said, nope, I'm not going to be that character in a horror movie, and turned around, walking to the elevator. As I stepped in the elevator, I started to calm myself and stuff. But just as the elevator started going up, I heard a high-pitched woman-like scream coming from the parking lot. Hard to explain, but my body started shaking uncontrollably. I pressed the button of the floor I needed repeatedly and kinda was just extremely confused and scared. I did visit that building one more time with my friends, which made me feel relaxed about the whole ordeal. But when I asked them to come to the parking lot with me, they chickened out, saying, "It's creepy there, man." We bought and moved into my house about a year ago. It's not a super old house. It was built in like the 50s, like many houses are. It's cute and bright, the neighborhood is quiet, and it has a wonderful view. Our neighbor was a previous owner. She lived here with her daughter when they were younger. It has good vibes. It's a nice place. For the past 15 years, I've been living somewhere that was absolutely void of spookiness. In all that time, I think I might have had a ghost cat jump on my bed a couple times. Otherwise, I didn't even turn the lights on in that house. There was just nothing in it. But this one? Oh my gosh. For the first half year we've lived here, Something weird has happened almost daily. Phantom doorbell ringing, door knocking, knocking from the attic, constant creaking, a strange figure in the backyard, feeling poked by something when I was trying to sleep, and then it running away, something screaming in my ear while I was asleep, a shadow looking at me from around a corner, rattling objects, beautiful phantom whistling and chimes, and what I can only describe as golden sparkles hovering around the ceiling. Like I said, weird stuff happens so often, this probably isn't even the full list. Come to think of it, my son would get scared half to death because he kept hearing me call his name when he was in his room. I had to lie sometimes and say it was me, just so he'd feel better. Anyway, on a whim, I decided to order some sage from Amazon. I've been wanting it for ages. I'm sensitive to odours. It smelled like mothballs when we first got here, and sage is so great for making bad smells go away. And hey, if it happened to make our ghosts go away too, so be it. And it did. Started burning the stuff about twice a week and everything stopped. Like not a thing for a few months now. So much so, I'm almost kind of sad. I miss the chimes, and I would have liked to see the sparkles again. It's peaceful here now, and I have no new stories to tell. I still sleep with the lights on though. Why risk it? So to give some context, I was 4 or 5 years old at the time, and I was living with my mom and my stepdad. It was a really weird atmosphere that I feel only got worse as my parents' relationship worsened, and he eventually began assaulting her in the home, accompanied by many loud fights and often calls to the police. Things began slowly. We'd hear the balls on the pool table hitting each other. Change in the house would disappear. Sometimes my mom told me she heard kids playing on the stairs during late hours of the night. I also have vivid memories of a man or entity that would stare at me from the shadows while I was laying on the couch late at night. My aunt, who babysat me at the time, used to make me sleep on the side of the couch facing the stairs when she slept over, so she didn't have to look at him. Things eventually got weirder. One night, my mom thought she had forgotten to let the dog outside to use the bathroom, because she heard the dog running around downstairs and could hear her collar jingling all crazy. When she got up to let her out, she heard the dog run upstairs, and she followed and, surprise, the dog wasn't there. She was actually asleep outside because someone forgot to let her back in earlier that night. I remember waking up one night out of a dream and having to use the bathroom really badly. I climbed out of the top bunk of my bed and started walking to the bathroom, which was probably within 15 feet of my bedroom door. As I'm walking to the bathroom, I shit you not, a fluorescent orb object or being of some sort came through the door of the bathroom and slowly approached me. The door was probably not any bigger than a foot or a foot and a half in diameter, with a solid white light blue hue in the centre, and slightly multicoloured outside effects that I can now only relate to looking at the back of a CD in sunlight. There was a light on, but it would have been behind me to my right. But being the 4 or 5-year-old small frightened child that I was, I didn't feel comfort when I met the entity and didn't approach it or try to communicate in any way. I wish I would have now. I was incredibly scared, and I remember facing it while backing up slowly, until I got to my bedroom door, and then sprinting to my bunk as fast as I could. When I laid down, it didn't leave. I remember peeping at it until I eventually went to sleep. So I work at a pizza place that's like a 3-minute drive to a very haunted cemetery that was on Ghost Adventures at one point. We're also on a very busy road that has at least 2 deaths every month from drunk drivers. So I don't know if the shadow figure who watches us came from. I've only been working at the pizza place for a year, and almost every night he does something. He's a tall figure that I've heard speak sometimes. One time, both my managers had to leave, so they put me in charge of closing. I was pretty cool with that because who wouldn't want to blast their favourite music in the dining room speakers? So I saw someone in the kitchen just staring at me, and I heard a male's voice asking me if I've cleaned the bathrooms. It didn't click in my mind, it wasn't my manager, because it was 4 a.m. and I just got through a 10-hour shift running off a monster and a slice of pizza. I looked up to see a tall man in the kitchen, slowly into the darkness of it all. So I was like, what the fuck? And waited outside. Another time was when I was helping a customer carry out around 6 of our biggest pizzas and some of our food in our catering menu. Without giving away where I work, 2 of those pizzas could feed a class of 20 with a decent sized slice. Her car was in the back of our parking lot, which is always an absolute mess. While walking, I felt the same feeling I feel around the spirit, telling me to stay by the car for a couple of seconds to help the customer make sure the evening is secure. I think he saved my life when a car came speeding and nearly hit someone. It may be stupid, but I feel like I would have been killed. I don't think the spirit is evil. I just think the spirit may be lost or something. The building isn't old at all. I'm now only thinking about this because I was talking to my 2 managers about this. I'll share their stories. So I'm going to call my manager Daisy. Daisy would do her runaround before leaving to make sure everything is clean for the morning shift. She says that she always felt followed, and that feeling is always followed up by some of our trays being thrown to the floor. Nothing was ever thrown at her though. I feel like he's just trying to grab her attention. Or when she's sitting in the dining room doing paperwork, she absolutely refuses to look in the kitchen or any of the mirrors, because even if he may be friendly, it's still unsettling. I never interact with the spirit because I'm scared that it could get dangerous, even if he's friendly. I refuse to even close by myself. Should I even be worried about him? I've recently moved to Weed, California, a small town next to Mount Shasta, for work. I'm an avid hiker and love exploring, so naturally, 2 days ago, I decided to hike the mountain on one of my days off. Not entirely sure why, but I decided to drive my car very deep into the forests surrounding the base of the mountain, as far as the dirt road would allow me. It was around 3 p.m. with a clear sky, so I was very confident and enjoying the scenery as I got out of my car and started my hike, heading closer to the mountain. At first, it was your regular everyday hike. Lots of birds and squirrels around. The smell of nature that fills your lungs as you walk across the terrain. It wasn't until I reached a small dried up river that I noticed something was off. As I stopped to look at the dried up river and take pictures, I noticed that it was strangely very, very quiet. No birds chirping, no signs of squirrels or other animals, and even the sound of the wind you hear when you're on a mountain seemed to be completely gone. At the time, I thought it was just an odd coincidence and started walking up alongside the river. But as I kept walking and being able to only hear my own footsteps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not the kind of feeling that makes you think someone is outside your window watching you. The kind of feeling that makes you feel multiple people or things are observing your every movement, studying you. I've never had that kind of feeling in my life. But what happened after made me completely forget about that feeling. I suddenly started to hear something out of nowhere that sounded like angelic humming, or maybe a song with no lyrics. But it also sounded strangely electric, like the sound telephone lines make. It wasn't very loud, but enough to make me look in the direction it was coming from. I looked to the other side of the dried up river that had multiple trees and other foliage to see someone or something looking straight at me. It almost looked like a ghost with it looking completely white. But this thing was very clearly there. It almost looked like it was wearing a robe, but I couldn't see any feet, hands, or even a face. Although it had an oval head. However, I could feel it looking straight at me, almost as if it was trying to remember every detail. Even from far away, I could tell that its entire body had a very weird texture. Almost like porcelain, but if porcelain was a silky fabric. It was very obviously not human. I was very understandably in complete shock and terror, frozen in place, kind of scary. We both looked at each other for what felt like forever, but it was most likely around 20 to 30 seconds. I very, very slowly started walking backwards. I don't think I took more than 2 steps when it tilted its head, as if it was curious or even surprised at what I was doing. All the while, I could still hear that electric, angelic humming. I swear it got a little louder when I took those steps back. When I turned my head to look behind me, to make sure the way was clear so I could run, the song suddenly stopped. Abruptly, without warning. This shocked me, and when I turned back to look at this thing, it was gone. No sign of it anywhere. As soon as I saw that it disappeared, I ran as fast as I could, following the path I took back. Even after it had disappeared and while I was running, I could still feel like I was being watched from all sides. I almost tripped a few times in how fast I was going. When I got to my car, sounds of animals and the mountain winds suddenly came back, but I was still scared out of my mind and drove as fast as I could away from the mountain. I've never had anything paranormal happen to me in the past, and I've honestly always been very skeptical of stuff like that. But this experience has left me questioning a lot of things. I don't think I want to go back on that mountain. I've even had a nightmare about the experience. I'm not even sure what I saw or what to call it. So a few days ago, my mom went out to buy some stuff in the market. Things like vegetables for dinner and that. When she was coming back, she heard me asking her from the window if she bought me my favourite dessert. Nothing strange, since I do tend to do that. However, I wasn't even awake at the time because I had just finished my final terms and was exhausted. It could not have been my sister because she was in school too. And it's not the first time something like this happens. Like, I swear to have heard my dad, who's currently in another country, calling me from the living room. Or my sister asking me if I was at home by text because she heard me coming to the house. There was no one there. But that's not the strangest thing. Recently, today, early in the morning, I woke up at 1 a.m. I've had a pretty bad sleeping schedule recently. And I took the opportunity to read a book and distract myself until I felt sleepy again, which was around 5 a.m. I tried to sleep, but man, I couldn't. I felt as if someone was grabbing me by the arms really hard and pressing my chest down. I couldn't breathe at all, like I was suffocating. Scared? Of course I ran away to my parents' bedroom and slept with my mom. Around 8 a.m. when I woke up, my mom told me that she felt as if someone was breathing in her face and watching her from really close. Honestly, those are 2 examples of what's happened in the past year. Like doors opening by themselves, the sound of something falling but we never find what fell, or when we let the lights on and go out so people think there's someone in the house. We look from outside and it's off, but when we open the door they're on. I honestly have no idea what the fuck is going on. I used to manage a dry cleaners in London. We were open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m, but after 3 p.m. all of the other staff would go home, leaving myself or whoever was on shift alone to serve customers and close the shop. London being London, we had a motion sensor door chime that'd ring whenever somebody would open or close the door, and CCTV set up to watch the door and front counter. There was a monitor at the back of the shop, so you could check the CCTV before going to serve customers. My normal routine would be to grab a coffee, a newspaper, and a bite to eat as 3 p.m. approached, knowing that once everyone left at 3 p.m, I'd be unable to leave the shop unattended. I'd sit and read in the back of the shop and listen to the radio. If a customer came in, the door would chime, and as I approached the front of the shop, I'd glance up at the CCTV just to make sure it wasn't a gang of hoodlums waiting. So I'm sitting there one evening reading the paper when I hear a thud at the front counter. I glance up at the CCTV and there's a man standing at the counter. I immediately get up and start walking towards the front, wondering if I'd missed the door chimes somehow, and I have another glance up at the CCTV. The man was still standing there. He was standing perfectly still, hands down by his side, which was unusual. Usually, people either came in carrying a bunch of clothes, came in and started going through their bag and pockets looking for a collection ticket, or would stand and shift their weight around from side to side. So I pause for a few seconds and watch this guy on the monitor, and he isn't moving. Like, at all. He looked more like a cardboard cutout than a living, breathing person. Anyway, I walk the 4 or 5 steps to the front counter, turn the corner, and there's nobody there. The door was firmly closed. The motion sensor hadn't rang. I tested the motion sensor by opening the door and it was working fine. Weird, right? Well, it gets even weirder. The next day, I'm talking to a colleague and I mention that the motion sensor might be broken, so keep an eye on the CCTV. She asks why I think it might be broken, so I tell her about what had happened the night before. Her eyes go wide open. We have a little chat, and she tells me that she's seen exactly the same man on a few occasions. Never activating the doorbell, just standing there perfectly still with his arms by his side. I worked there for another 3 or 4 years, but never saw him again after that. A few weeks after my dad died, I woke up one night and he was standing at the foot of my bed. He didn't move or speak. He just stood there with a little smile. I was obviously surprised, and still half asleep, my response was, "What are you doing here? You're dead." I realise this sounds like an odd thing to say to a recently deceased parent, but my dad and I were best friends and shared a sense of humour where we would never offend each other. He worshipped the ground I walked on, and I hit him. We loved each other completely. If I'd said that to him while alive, I'd have gotten a big laugh in response. I sat there looking at him for a minute confused, thinking, nah, this is all just a dream, and then lay down and went back to sleep. The following afternoon, I got a call from my sister. I could tell straight away from the cracked tone in her voice that it wasn't just a random call. I almost knew why she was calling. We exchanged pleasantries and then I said, "I dreamt about Dad last night." Without hesitation, she replies, "He came to see you too, didn't he?" She'd had the exact same dream. She woke up and he was standing at the foot of her bed with a cheeky little smile on his face. A few years earlier, my mum had died from cancer and I wasn't taking it very well. I was 19 at the time and spiralling. I'd randomly started crying and was struggling to cope. I'd often hold it all in during the day and wait for my girlfriend to go to bed before having a little cry by myself on the sofa. So I'm sitting there on the sofa one night, head on my knees, looking down at the floor, quietly sobbing, when I assumed my girlfriend was walking in the room. It was near Christmas, and we'd been wrapping presents, so there was wrapping paper on the floor. She stood next to me, on top of the wrapping paper, making a crinkle noise, and put her hand on the back of my head. I wiped the tears away and said, I'm okay, I'm coming to bed." Then I look up, and there's nobody there. My girlfriend was sound asleep in the next room. God, I miss them. My wife and I found our house roughly 2 years ago. Everything seemed fine when looking around. Good location, right size, in our price range, and it felt warm and inviting. About 4 miles north of Detroit. Prior to moving in, Google and internet searches just showed the typical realtor website and other typical stuff. So we moved in. After about 2 months, I started getting woken up to 3 knocks on an interior wall at 2:57 a.m. This happened every night for over a month. Sometimes the 3 knocks would come in series. 3 knocks, a pause, maybe around a minute, and then more. It was almost 3 a.m. I'm startled awake and don't have a great grasp on the length of time. Fast forward, I do another internet search about the area. Native Americans that inhabited the area. Really, anything I could find. Then, Dozens of news stories show up about a woman who was murdered in our house in 2018 by her husband, who then called 911 to tell the police what he did. This progressed. We would hear a soft woman's voice that we could not make out coming from a back room with no TV, radio, or anything that could make noise. We called a family friend who has a PhD in demonology. He came out with a minister and the Holy Brigade from church, burned sage to stir up the presence. In the 6 hours they were here, they got IR video of orbs, which changed direction sharply. EVP recordings where they were given an answer from Dennis as to who was in the house. Dennis is sinned backwards. They cleansed the house, then cleansed us of any attachments. Everything seemed calm and quiet for a couple of months. This simply pissed off what was in here. It came back hard, mentally and physically coming at us. My wife and I are both around 40. I'm a firefighter and medic. She's a physician assistant and in good shape and health. We both started experiencing stomach pain, back pain, headache, but never together or at the same time. It was random times, but always in this house. The mental thoughts of harming ourselves, no motivation to do anything, and injuries became more urban we could handle. I suffered a spinal cord injury on the job, as well as every complication you can think of, as well as left arm permanent nerve damage and balance issues. My wife lost vision in one of her eyes and developed shingles. With the house itself, more noises, a cross nailed to the wall in the back bedroom where the presence was pulled off of the wall and found on the floor. The St. Michael statue sitting in the middle of an empty dresser was knocked to a soft carpeted floor with its sword hand broken off. Kitchen cabinets, which were closed at night, would be open in the morning, all high ones. Random smells of rotten meat in areas of the house. Multiple times sitting on our couch watching TV or in bed, I'd feel a cool hand on the back of my neck. I could feel long fingers in a palm. We called the church brigade back out. This time, a priest and demonologist, along with 2 other people from the church, including a skeptic. This time, I thought of searching Google Maps for images. There's a Google Street image of the house that shows a reflection on the front door. The demonologist immediately went to the demon Mara. They did also look at fairies, not the Tinkerbell kind. They again gathered evidence and did a cleansing on us for any attachments. The minister and demonologist is a family friend. When trying to cleanse me, I've never felt such intense anger and hatred towards people and tried to kick them all out of the house. I apparently didn't blink once for almost 10 minutes. The priest and minister were preparing to do an exorcism on me. In the end, they cleansed the house, placed olive oil crosses above every doorway and window in the house. They left around 11:45 p.m. Waking up the next morning at around 6:30, I saw there was an identical murder about 3 miles from our house, where an 80-something-year-old man shot and killed his wife, called 911, then turned the gun on himself. I don't believe in coincidences, and there's a small river that runs from a block from our house to where this murder happened. Now that we're trying to move out, we have this entity trying to stop us at every turn. Pain, illness, thoughts that are not our own. I'm not religious and never have been. This kind of changed my perspective though. Yesterday, I was feeling the presence hard. It felt like a giant weight on your shoulders and like something was watching. I recited the Lord's Prayer and St. Michael's Prayer. Every hair on my body was on end. We've also boiled Madagascar vanilla, but will not sage because we don't want it to get pissed off.